Without further ado, Dr. Leach, I'm going to actually give you the microphone and let you do this. So go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. As I mentioned last week, I always throw up an agenda slide, but I don't feel constrained to cover the agenda necessarily in the exact sequence of the slide. But I believe that all these subjects are important for us to talk about today. I want to, though, clarify something in general when I participate in these discussions. Anytime I say your project, I'm referring to at the end of your entire course of study, you have to do a project. That's the project I'm talking about. You know, I'm not trying to talk about a particular project in the course at the time, you know, that I'm speaking to, because it's my passion to prepare all of you for the final project you have to do. Just one comment on some of the things I read in the discussions, and I'm not trying to talk about any one person here. It's one thing if in the question you're asked about your personal experiences, whether it's in your organization or whatever, because there's going to be broad questions framed in the way of your personal experiences. In that situation, you say, here's what I encountered and here's what I got out of it. And we want you to very personalize the material, not just because you're going to do a final project, but because we believe it's going to help you be a better leader in the long run. So with that in mind, though, in doctoral writing, we have to be careful if we make a broad statement of how the world is, that we connect it to a specific source. And we do that through references. And so that's important to keep in the back of your mind, even as you're writing comments in a discussion, wherever possible. If you know some. Now, the one I'm going to grab onto is the general concept that a leader who has an open door policy is going to be more effective than a leader who has a closed door policy. I know many of you hold that belief. And that's great if you can point us to actual academic research that shows that. And I'm going to leave that alone now, and I'm going to move into the main thing. But just one other thing, you know, we had an interesting conversation with Carl at the beginning before most of you got on, and that was length of response. It is highly prized in academic writing to be concise. And so length is not quality. Length is just length. To the extent that you can answer what it is you're trying to write about in as concise a way as possible, the higher quality you're showing, because you're not wasting the reader's time who's reading your research. With that said, and I'm not trying to single, you know, anyone out. I'm just trying to help you for the future. So let me move on into the canned presentation. I happen to, in my academic career, I happen to come from the perspective of international management and from marketing. And I thought it would be interesting today to take some fundamental marketing concepts and relate them to the divisional form of Mintzberg. Okay, now that's not the main thrust of it, but I'm trying to give you an example when we get into, you know, normality. To a marketing person, the concept of what a brand is, the brand is like the Holy Grail from the point of view of it is the essence of who you are. You know, when I talk about the axiom of ethics versus tactics, brand attributes is getting at ethics. Okay. You'll notice it's the responsibility of the strategic apex to make sure we're ethical, regardless of the countries we operate in. Okay. The fact is that in a global world, big global multinational, they move resources around across countries. And so just the mechanics of that intercountry logistics of supplies and raw materials, as well as capital and people, take place at the largest part of the organization. That tends to be centralized. Balanced scorecard is how the strategic apex keeps track of each of their individual operations as an investment. So it's clearly a structural frame orientation. Okay. But then you'll notice within each of the country, there's something called the 4 Ps. The 4 Ps stands for place. Where am I going to buy this or get this service? The product. What is the tangible thing or the service that I'm receiving? The price. How much is it going to cost me? And promotions. Promotions is how do we communicate to potential customers the value of our brand and the value of our products and why they should, and we've tried to persuade them why they should choose us over the competition. Those 4 elements really have to be, make sense within a local country. And I need to stress that. So even though there may be a bigger, group that's doing logistics, and even though there's going to be ultimately structural frame measurements that your entire organization has to meet, if you don't know how to successfully deal in your local country, you won't be successful in that local country. And that's really, and the reason why I'm putting this up today is that in our discussions today about cultural dilemmas, it's an example on the marketing side why we had to be local country relevant. What's normal?
Excuse me, Dr. Leach?
Yes.
Could you go back to the 4 Ps and if you would recite them again, please?
Sure. Price, what I'm going to pay. Promotion, how you're going to advertise to me, how you're going to communicate with me as a customer. Place, the way I actually get a hold of your service or product. And we're going to have an interesting example on the last slide about that. Price, place, promotion, what am I missing? Product, and if one thing is true, and you're going to see that in the previous slide, I had a quote from a guy named Arnold. It's universally pretty much given that if one of the 4 Ps has to change country by country, market by market, it's the product itself. And again, I'm going to talk about that, later on. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So what is normal? I want to take a few seconds first to talk about average before I talk about normal. That might sound strange, but hey, I'm a strange guy. The calculation of a mean is that I take all of the numerical observations of whatever it is I'm looking at, I sum them up, I divide it by the number of observations, and that gives me the mean. The mode is another way to measure average, and it's saying if I take every observation I have and I order them from low to high or high to low, at what point is half of the observations numerically, not half of the value or the total value that you use in the mean, but what is the point numerically where half of the values are above the number and half of the values are below the number? And then there's mode. And ideally, when we're studying something, we like to only have one mode. And I don't want to get too deep into a quantitative statistics course here, because that's not our purpose. But we like to have a single mode of feeling. But what the mode is as we take all of our values from the lowest to the highest and the numerical number of them, we put them on a histogram. And the one that is the highest value, we get the most observations of it. That is the mode. Now, underneath something called central limits theorem, we would really like the mean and the mode and the median to be the exact same number. Because they all kind of reinforce each other. So let's go back now to the concept of what's normal. You're going to see the top slide here, and I don't know if my cursor comes through, but the top slide here is a distribution that looks, to me, pretty normal as a statistician. You'll notice that right at 0 is the peak of the curve. And by the way, this is a histogram, actually. So right at the peak of the histogram, right at 0, that's the mode, whatever value that was, okay? And then you'll notice that not only is that the mode, but the way this particular diagram shows it, I'm just going to tell you that also happens to be the mean, right there at the top of the curve. Because you can just visually see that if you kind of took all those values and added them together and divided by the total, you'd get there. So in this diagram, we've got, and you can see from a mode perspective, half of the curve is below 0 and half of the curve is above 0. So when we read Trump and Terrance's research, you'll see all sprinkled throughout his book a cultural item that he's talking about. I'm going to get into that concept more deeper. But he'll have a numerical value, and then he'll show those numerical values from the highest number to the lowest number. Okay. Those values he's showing actually is that 0 on this chart. It's on an absolute scale. Where did that culture fall? Okay. But behind that is the implication that there is one of these charts for every one of those numbers. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about with this idea of what is normal, there's something called a standard deviation. And standard deviation just tells us how far away from the mean, the average value, that any particular observation falls. And in a truly absolutely normal curve, okay, 33% of the population will be between -1 and 0, and another 33% of the population will be between 0 and +1. So what does that mean? It means that 66% within a given national culture are going to fall in that range within a standard. And so from my perspective, that's what I tend to call normal. Now, there's some times where we might go beyond one standard deviation, but it's safe to say that if 66% of the people in your national country that you're trying to deal with believe something, that's what's normal. Is there any questions about this before I go on? And I understand I just crammed a 3-credit-hour course all into 4 minutes.
Right. So for culture, and this is Carl here, or Chad,
Yeah.
whichever one you want to call him. If you have 60% of people who believe something, that would be normal. That doesn't necessarily mean what they believe is true.
Well, no, it is true for that culture.
So it's true for that culture, even if it could be scientifically disproven. Like, let's just say the world was flat. There was a time.
But wait a minute. But wait a minute.
Go ahead.
For that culture, the world is flat.
But scientifically inaccurate.
Well, wait a minute. If you're going to try to go in and manage a culture of people who believes the world is flat, and that fact is not important, to what you're trying to accomplish,
Gotcha.
leave it alone.
Got you. Okay.
Okay?
I got you. Great point, Doc.
I'm trying, the whole purpose of Franz Stamperneris and Chris Hendon Turner's work is to help you to not get into fights over things that don't matter.
Because, Doc, it will be useless to be able to market and to penetrate a culture if you're going to impose your own on them. You know, that creates conflict, and you won't be able to sell anything there. So it's not for us to make a judgment call on someone else's culture, right?
Now, but critical point, okay, that I need to make. Brand attributes are core ethics at the strategic apex. We may choose not to go into a particular culture and try to do business there if we'd have to sacrifice our ethics.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
All right. So now I want to draw your attention to two normal distributions that are side by side. Remember, in a scientific way, the values that every person felt within this cultural question, right, is scored there. Now, the whole idea of the two distributions, you got country A on the left and country B on the right. And you can see if we take a look at country B on the right, and we go right to the top of its distribution right here, and we were to draw a line straight down, just the absolute mean value, look where we fall on country A's chart. We're crazy people. We're just approaching something for what's normal for us, right? For our culture. And man, we are in a fringe area of between 1% and 2% of people in that culture would naturally act that way. This is the most profound thought in the book you just read. Okay? All right, so let me move on. I want to specifically take time for a second.
Dr. Leach, would you go back to that then? You
Sure.
mentioned that it's the most important point. Would you restate it, please?
All right. If I go right here, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so see that spot right there?
Yes.
This is a country's distribution on a question. Okay?
Yes.
And if we just blindly were to draw a line from here straight down to here. Let me try to do it real quick. Hold on. Let me try to do it real quick on this slide. So let's see. I'm not great at drawing, so let's do that, and let's do that, and let's do this. I gotta get it straight. All right, does everybody see that new line?
Yes.
Everybody see the new line?
Yes.
Look at how little of the entire curve that, or more important, look at all of this curve, right? Look at how much of this other curve that would not recognize the person behaving for dead average for their culture, right? For their normal culture. Think about how strange this person is, who's coming in as the new leader, right? And trying to get us to do something specifically that relates to this cultural value. One of you wrote about a new director that did not gel well with the pre-existing society. And ultimately that director killed a program that was about to be launched that was going to be, at least in the opinion of the staff who had been there, and the director had been there before, was going to be critical for the success of the organization next year. Who was it who wrote about that? Could you, and if you're online, could you just comment for a second about that director and whether they were behaving in a way that they fit in here, or whether they more behaving in a way they fit in there? Is that person on the line? If not, I'll move on. All right, I'm going to move on. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay. All right. You would think, I would think, anybody would think in any culture, time is time, right? Well, guess what? Time is not a universal, is not universally viewed, particularly in management across cultures. And it isn't even viewed the same way within a culture across different disciplines in the culture, okay? Because sometimes, you know, the way that we have to do our job, we start to deviate a little bit because of our responsibility from what the main culture is. So let's start with France. The entire French culture is, and the way you read these types of charts is, the bigger a circle is, the more important it is. And then whether these circles have a lot of overlap or no overlap, there are some diagrams that has 2 of the 3 circles linked and the third one's way off, not even linked at all, okay? But in the French culture, if you're going to manage in the French culture, you have to start with, what did we do in the past? Because obviously what we did in the past was good and right and perfect. What we need to do right now? Yeah, we need to do something right now, but we need to think about how we did this in the past, because in the past we were perfect. Because the past got us to where we're at today. If we weren't successful in the past, we wouldn't be here today as an organization. The future? Well, the future will take care of itself. Right now, I've got to do something, but how did I do it in the past? I'm not asking if that makes sense to you. I'm asking if you understand the point I'm trying to make. All right, let me move on to Germany. Germany lives in the present, and its present circle is a little bit bigger than the past and the future. But the most important thing in the German culture is I've got something I got to do right now. I might look to what I did in the past. I might think about the future implications, but I got to do something right now. And so that's how you read the German chart. Let me talk about Sweden. And I'll tell you, of all the national cultures I've dealt with, I mean, I have many friends who grew up in the Swedish culture. So I'm not talking about them as individuals, but they're very confusing to me. And it kind of shows in this dimension. For them, the past is the past, the present's the present, the future's the future. More important, they're all kind of equally important, and they're all linked more closely together. This diagram, and understand, I'm not a great artist, okay? But this diagram means to imply that they're more linked together. And so when you try to sit down with you know, and manage truly a group of Swedish people, and you're not from their orientation, and remember we talked about Hofstede's research last week, and the Swedish are real. going back to the normal distribution. Let me do that for a second. For all the rest, when Hasted's value said that they were a 3, they were way out on here. Okay? Way out. Many standard deviations from the worldwide mean on femininity, on consensus driving. All right, let me talk about the U.S. The U.S.'s primary focus is the future. And you'll notice the U.S.'s future bubble is as big as the French's past bubble. You'll notice the U.S.'s present bubble is the same size as the French bubble. And you'll notice that the U.S.'s past bubble is the same size as the French's U.S. bubble. And in the U.S., we're doing things today to impact the future. We're thinking about the future. Yes, we got to get this task done today, but what is its implications for the future? Oh, what do we do in the past? The past is the past. It's done with. Might be a little bit interesting, but I'm talking purely from a U.S. cultural orientation. Everything's about transformation, and by definition, if I'm transformative, the past was wrong. So what happens, either vice versa, when a U.S. manager tries to go manage in the French culture, and what happens in the French culture if someone from the French culture comes to manage in the U.S. culture?
Dr. Leach?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. The diagram 4. I was with you until you hit diagram 4. And are you talking about an organization's culture? Or are you talking about the national culture? Or are you talking about the intersection between both?
No, I'm talking about within the U.S. national culture, the normative value for people, okay, who grew up in that culture is we are very much future oriented and we think less about the past.
I would take exception to that, and I would suggest that there's a pendulum that swings in our country in which we may make notable strides, we may have innovations, and then we reach a point at which time people get anxious. And there's a hankering to return to what's familiar, to return to the past. And, so that's where we tend to go. But that doesn't last forever. The pendulum swings in the other direction as well. After people get to the point where they see the inconsistencies and the ineffectiveness of the past orientation, they want to swing in the direction of the future. So at least from my vantage point, I don't know that holds.
Okay. Now, great question. And by the way, I don't believe every question's a great question. Okay. And we won't go there today. All right. But let me try to respond to your content. Okay. If you look at this diagram, the past bubble isn't a dot. In other words, yes, we do think about the past at times. And there is no doubt there is a percentage of any group of people at any point in time that you're going to try to institute change, that are going to be reactionary and say, I don't want to change. And things were fine in the past, and they're fine today. Why should I change? But here's the most important point. If you were going to be writing a research, a literature review as part of your final project, okay? You have an obligation, if you come across research that it was done in a proper way, to report the results. The diagram that I'm showing you here, I am reporting to you the results of someone's research. Now, the way you would try to, and you just don't blindly accept someone's results, you go and you look at their methodology. Okay, how did they gather their data? It's wonderful that there's a whole part of the book where they show you how to ask questions in such a way as to build one of these diagrams. So if you can't find one of these diagrams for your specific organization, right? So far, we've only talked about a national culture. Go read that part of the book, do a survey, and calculate the values for your organization. That would be a wonderful thing in a final project. So at least I'm exposing you to a tool, okay, to think about this concept as it relates to your organization. Comments? From anybody, comments?
Let me just make one comment. This is Bill. I was kind of thinking about this issue. When we're working, in a management kind of situation, say we're introducing some type of a new innovation. I was kind of thinking about when I worked in counseling, when I worked in working with staffs. Sometimes we would try to figure out a person's communication style, a person's value system. Some people are, for example, convinced by data, numbers. Okay, if I'm going to introduce a new innovation, I may say, this particular approach has been effective in 75% of the companies that it's been tried in. That might convince, a person who's data-driven. Someone else who is more relational might be more interested in, okay, what's this going to do for the life of people within a particular situation? So, now those are some values that people work with. If I'm looking at these diagrams, if I'm trying to introduce an innovation, maybe in the U.S., yeah, we're very aware of the past, the present, the future, but we are somewhat future-oriented. We want to know, okay, what's this going to produce for the future? By same in France, there may be a little more sense of how does this really connect with what's happened? Will this kind of fit with the heritage? Are we starting to move outside of the heritage? I don't know. Does that kind of get at what you're saying in terms of these comparisons?
Yes, it's spot on. But there's also some implications here as it relates to change management. It is very easy, relatively speaking, in the U.S. to implement change, and I don't care what the subject is, and it is relatively hard in France to implement change. And therefore, for the practitioner, there is always the question of how much change should I try to do at any point in time? How much change can my organization absorb? And therefore, if there's a continuum of incrementalism all the way to something called the Big Bang, where, just from a pure tactics, where should I go? And that's what I'm trying to stress to everybody who's thinking about change. It might be worthwhile for you to do a survey, even of just yourself, and it may not be the entire organization. It might be ask some key stakeholders,
I totally agree with you saying, Dr. Leach. Not that my personal experience is the truth, but I bear witness to that. I was in Zambia back in May, Lusaka, Zambia. And different places, the roads were fine, and some places the roads were terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible. So I was asking some of the folks around, how they felt about it. I was just doing a listening tour. And I came across, I'm thinking about how things work in the U.S. And I was told a story of how there was a rich gentleman who owned a trucking company, and he was not allowed to fix the roads, which would impact the hundreds of trucks that he had. because the government feared he was going to run for political office and win because he fixed the roads. So again, a lot of this stuff really doesn't speak to common sense or our ideology as much as your point of if 60% operate like that, that's the reality on the ground for that place or that culture, right or wrong.
Right. And you know,
Dr. Leach,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm still having some difficulty with this, and I don't want to belabor the point.
No. Let's belabor it, please. Go ahead.
But I think that one of the things that makes this problematic for me in terms of perceiving the United States as a place where change is relatively easy to make, and I guess you're talking about in comparison to other places, is you think about the current cultural war we have going on. The fact of the matter is what has things at a virtual standstill, what has things at a virtual standstill is at least my perception that the country is kind of evenly divided on these subjects. And so it's not as easy to introduce certain innovations. I think when you talk about business, that's one thing, but when you think about the women's right to vote, people of color's right to vote, when you think about what's happening with the LGBTQ community in terms of gaining currency and acceptance in the larger culture, those are not easy transitions to make. Those are very painful and difficult transitions. We nonetheless do them, but it's not easy.
Let me go back to statistics for a second, okay? And the concept of what is normal. Have you heard of the phrase, the melting pot?
Yes, I have.
Okay. The melting pot was a theory that fit up through the 1960s in the US, or at least those people with power believed it fit, okay? Now, the whole idea of the melting pot was you had this big national culture, and individual people, as they were coming from other cultures as immigrants, were expected to gravitate into what was normal, and that was called the melting pot. And as long as that was reality, you had a diagram that looked like this, and that diagram, notice, has just one modal value. I believe the point you're trying to make from statistics is we no longer are a single modal country. We now are bimodal. There's a whole bunch of people, and I'm saying, right or wrong, good or bad, right or left, from the point of this diagram, okay? But there is clearly approximately 30 to 40% of the country that believes strongly around certain social issues. And then there's another 30 or 40% of the country, just from a histogram, okay, that strongly believe quite differently than that group. And the other 30% are evenly divided in the middle. That's called multimodal. Okay, and so that may be some of what you're getting at. We are no longer a single culture through the thing called the melting pot, whatever that effect was. Okay, and we can and anybody can legitimately argue whether the melting pot ever really happened or not, because I have lived in enough parts of the U.S. and when I'm in other countries, I give a different lecture that says, those of you who think the U.S. is this monolithic single culture, you're wrong. There is a highly regional aspect of culture in the U.S., and then that's also impacted by demographics in the U.S. One of the demographics happens to be race. And so, like any piece of research, you only use it in a way that it makes sense for the problem you're trying to solve. Does that help, what I just said?
Dr. Leach, thank you so very much for indulging me. Sorry to sidetrack the conversation, so I apologize to you and my peers on that.
No, stop. This was not a sidetrack. It is 100%, it is 100% on point to what I'm trying to talk about.
Those are essential concepts. Can we let Courtney get in? He's had his hand up here for a few minutes. Go ahead, Courtney.
No, yeah, thank you. I'm enjoying the conversation, but the question I want to ask, the theory presented, is it fixed in terms of for life, or over time it will change in terms of what you...
Great question. I want to go back to my very, very first slide because I didn't spend some time on it. And I want to deal with the subject right.
Because I believe, you know, with time, you know, the cultural emphasis may change. I don't know.
All right. Notice my second bullet.
Yes.
So this guy by the name of Arnold wrote a wonderful book. Had enough impact on me that I remember it and I put it in this slide. Okay. There is a statement I'm about to make that is both true and is also a myth. The statement is globalization over time is driving the entire world to a uniform culture. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is on certain cultural attributes true. We just don't know yet what they're going to be.
Right.
There are most other cultural attributes where that's an absolute myth. And in fact, we have a whole bunch of Islamic countries that are rejecting the effects of globalization because they think their religion and their culture is at risk of this homogenization. And at the same time, there are Christians in the US who have that same fear that there's other, you know, because of globalization, there's other things that are becoming accepted that is heretical. Okay. So and understand, Arnold was writing from a international marketing perspective. Okay, his research. So what Arnold's observations is if you're going to win within a culture, you got to win within the culture by being culturally normal for that culture. Whatever's normal, that's what you've got to be. Yet, we can clearly point to, from a marketing perspective, specific concepts where the distribution on a worldwide basis, because of the internet and because of mass communications and because of brands going into other places, where there is a coming together and a coalescing around a normal value, a normal curve, if you will, that is more globally representative. Did that help? Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. And in fact, let me go to my second slide again. That's why down here on the local basis, if we don't have a product that's as culturally relevant locally, and we don't price it at an amount that people can afford in that culture, and if we are so blinded that we're only going to sell it the way we sold it in our home culture, we're not going to be successful. That's what the 4 Ps are about. I see that we've used 45 minutes of our 75 minutes. I only have one more concept I want to go through. So I want to make sure that at this point, we really cover everybody's questions up to this point, because I got plenty of time for the rest of my content. So go ahead, other questions about this. And let me get back to what I've said. Well, let me get back to the time slide. Anybody have any question about anything up to this point? All right, let me move on to my next subject. How many of you know what an Oreo cookie is? Somehow Bill muted me again, or somebody did.
I know you're on.
No, I turned myself back on.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. How many of you know what an Oreo cookie is?
Yes, we know.
Yeah, I know that one.
Do any, more important, do any of you not know what an Oreo cookie is? Mondamo does not know, correct?
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, here's what an Oreo cookie is in the US, and then we're going to talk about an Oreo cookie in Japan. Oreo cookies is a very famous brand mark, okay? In the US, it is a chocolate wafered cookie and a chocolate wafered cookie that is sealed together in the center with a vanilla flavored pasty-like substance, okay? But it's a hardened pasty-like substance. And when you go to eat one, in the US, you don't eat just one. You eat a lot of them. At any one time you sit down. But it's a treat, okay?
Okay.
And it has been around so long and is so successful in the US culture, it has arisen to being iconic. And in the US culture, there's a proper way to eat an Oreo cookie. And that's with a glass of milk. And you, some people, I see Carl is laughing. And as soon as I'm done, I ask Carl to confirm or deny what I'm about to say. But you separate the two pieces of the cookie, the two chocolate pieces of the cookie, and you dunk them in milk, and then you eat them. Now, Carl, is what I'm saying true or not from the U.S. perspective?
It depends. This is while his research is scientific. It depends. Some people like to drown the cookie in milk until the bubbles stop coming up, and then they eat it. So it just depends.
Okay, but is the proper way to truly eat an Oreo cookie is to have milk? Yes or no?
Yes, correct.
Does anybody disagree with that? Do we have anybody on the line from Japan? They would vehemently disagree with you that is not the proper way to eat an Oreo cookie. They say, now why is Dr. Leach talking about such an obscure thing as an Oreo cookie and the right way to eat it, right? And what does that have to do with our big project that we're going to spend easily a year of our life on to transform an organization? I mean, what's wrong with this guy? Now, let me go to my next slide. Okay, this is the advertising package of Oreo cookies in the US or Canada. Actually, this is the Canadian version, okay, because it talks about grams, right? And it talks, or no, this is the US version, and this is marked up from somebody by Canada, okay? And then you can see I think this is the Japanese version of Oreo cookies. It's either Japanese or it could be Chinese. I don't remember which country I grabbed it from. And I don't speak that language and know what the symbols mean. But here's kind of some key things. Notice the white right here. Hey, Carl, what is that white that the cookie is going into?
That is a splash of milk.
That is a splash of milk. What's this up here? This cup up here?
Is that tea or is
Yes,
it?
it's green tea specifically.
Green tea?
Not just tea, it's green tea.
Wow.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. And this is my last slide, okay? All right. So this product's been around decades, Millions of them are being sold in the US. We have a great market in the US. We have a great market in Canada. And we get it into our brain, we want to go to Japan. Right? So the first thing is there needs to be a filling for this to be an Oreo cookie, right? Right? And so what color? Remember, we're talking now about the product itself, one of the 4 pieces. What color should the cookie be? In the US, it should be white. And we have it as white. And why do we have it as white? When we think of the color white in the US, we think about virginity. We think about another product called soap and a product called ivory soap that we're going to use to wash our newborn babies in, right? White is culturally, it's pure, and culturally, it's a wholesome color. And when we show that color in another one of the 4 P's called promotion in advertising, when we use white, we are cluing the person in to this subliminally. Remember the symbolic frame? We're telling you subliminally, this is something good and wholesome for you. Everybody who is from the US understand that?
Mhm.
Mandamao, does white have a positive or negative or neutral connotation in your national culture?
Yeah, it speaks the same in terms of purity and all that. Yeah, we agree.
Okay.
Okay.
We don't, in Malaysia, is that also true? Or not?
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let me talk about Japan.
But Dr. Leach, I would just like to just share this. In Malaysia, Oreos, we dunk it into coffee.
Okay. All right. But you dunk it into something, right?
Right, we dunk it, yeah, into something, but definitely not milk. It's coffee.
And we're going, and hopefully I'm going to get back to that in some of my other bullets. Okay. In Japan, when somebody dies, what color do they turn?
White.
White. White in Japan is a subliminal cue to death, to danger, to unwholesomeness.
Hmm.
It is the exact opposite of white in the US. I just want you to think about that for a minute. So we have this product that its core feature is white. But it isn't just that it's white, it's vanilla tasting. And let me talk about the word vanilla for the moment. In the US, the phrase vanilla means normal. When we say something is vanilla, we mean it is pure. Okay, another consumption cue. Okay. Let's go to the packaging for a second. We have green tea. We have green as a big splotch there, right? And notice what color is the filling?
Green.
Green. Why? What does green mean? Well, I'm going to show you. Green means harmony. Green means reflection. We, at a certain time in the day, stop what we're doing. We go to a push cart and we drink a cup of green tea and we think about our day. That's what green means. Hence, our filling is going to be green. What's going to be the taste of our filling? Anybody? Yes, if you don't know.
Green tea.
Yes, it's oriented towards being very consistent with green tea. Now, why tea versus milk? I want you to think about the geography of Japan and the land availability and where it is in the world. And then I want you to think about the US and Canada and land availability and where it is in the world. And the US, because of it, and Canada, because of its great expanses of land, can afford to have cows.
Right.
You cannot afford to have cows in Japan. You just can't. No, I don't want to belabor this point too greatly, but I need to belabor it because things like geography impacts national culture. If you come from a very mountainous country where agriculture really can't be performed, or let's say agriculture revolves around trees like olive trees, right? Your approach to the world is going to be dramatically different than someone, let's say, in Malaysia, where it's summer all the time. And in Malaysia, how far are people generally from the ocean?
We are surrounded with the ocean, or rather with the straits, and then with we are surrounded on the west side with the Straits of Malacca, and on the east with the South China Sea.
Right.
But predominantly people live in the city, and we are pretty far away from the ocean.
Okay. But that wasn't always true for Malaysia, right? Before cities?
Yes, before cities, no. We
Okay.
we live a lot in the agricultural land.
Okay. So now let me go to package size. That's one of the 4 Ps in the form of product. Is 470 grams. Let me go back to what it is in US ounces, if I can read it off of the thing. Here. All right. This looks like it is 16.6 ounces. It's almost it's over a pound of cookies. You can't necessarily tell from this package size, but in general, it's 2 cookies in a package. It seems kind of odd, right? Well, it has to do with the place where the product is consumed, one of the 4 Ps. And let me go back now to the next slide. In general, you eat Oreo cookies in your home. In general. Because you bought a big package of them at the supermarket. And whatever reason you decide to eat, sit and eat some of them. Okay. In Japan, every day that you're working at a specific time, you go out with your peers to a push cart and you drink green tea and reflect. And it's not practical, and you wouldn't want to buy a pound of cookies. You want to have just enough cookies to have a cookie. That's why it's 2 cookies. And that gets into the point of purchase and the point of consumption. Okay. World of difference if I'm buying something away from my home and I consume it right then and there. Okay, we've got 15 minutes left. I want to talk for a few seconds about the assignments. I can't remember if it was the discussion assignment or the paper. And I'm not sure that the way I wrote it, it made a lot of sense. You know, my use of the English language is negatively impacted by my brain damage. Anyways, that's my excuse. But there's something. It could be a food. It could be a ritual. It could be a place. There is something that is unique about your national culture that describes your national culture. And I want you to find one of those things, think about it, and then think if someone's going to come in to manage from a totally different culture, if you had to tell them one thing, and that person's going to work for you, and you need to make sure that person is successful, because if they're not successful, you're not going to be successful. And so then I want you to, in your writing, tell me what would be important to tell that person, and you don't have to actually get really in depth. Being concise is of value. So does anybody have questions about that assignment?
I don't have a question, Dr. Leach, but I just want to identify what I was thinking about. So I was thinking about our culture in terms of the Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and I was thinking of the power distance. Mm-hmm. So Guyana, I was thinking of somebody from Hungary where the power distance is like about 46. And so that person's going to want to have more participatory kind of involvement with her staff. And so I would want to say to her that Guyana is a highly paternalistic and highly hierarchical kind of culture, both I think in the national and in many of the organizations as well, in their culture as well. So being respectful of titles and is important. There are other things, but I'll just stop there.
Great. Let me respond to that for a second with a brief story. Okay. I was in Bangkok, Thailand. And I was with another person, and each of us was handed a business card from somebody. Okay. I took the person's business card. I held it up like this. I did a slight bow of my head. And then I made a gesture of taking that business card and putting it right here in my suit coat pocket, right against my heart. So you got the visual imagery? Mm-hmm. They handed the business card to the other person that was with me. That person reached behind into his back pocket, pulled out a very frayed leather wallet, took the business card in, didn't acknowledge it was a business card in the ritualistic way that I did, which is what you're supposed to do when you receive someone's business card. They're honoring you with the right to contact them. And they took the business card, they put it in this old ratty wallet, they slid the business card into their back pocket, which meant it was against their rear end, and then they sat down. All right, let's move on to someone else's symbolic frame story or question or whatever. Go ahead.
I was going to ask culture and tradition, beliefs, like in my country in Zimbabwe. I've been trying to exercise my mind to find out what would be my national culture, but it's all mixed up with traditions and beliefs system. So yeah, it has been just an issue for me up to now. And I've been trying to do a survey asking some fellow friends and colleagues about what is our national culture.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just maybe shed a little bit of light there?
Sure. Well, let me ask you a question. Is Zimbabwe an artificial construct in that several groups were artificially slammed together at one time during colonial days or something else, and they were called a country? Or is Zimbabwe a country because a homogeneous group of people decided they were a country?
Okay, homogeneous people decided to be a country, yes.
Okay, so we're in that situation. So there should be a fairly homogeneous clustering, okay, from the normal curve within Zimbabwe. Now let me go to, so I'm trying to help you in a diagnostic way use the materials of this week. That's the whole point of all right. Let's go right here. When I think of the word tradition, and I could be wrong, but when I think of the word tradition, I think of past.
Okay.
I do. It would be valuable for you, not for this week's assignment. It would be valuable for you to look at how to structure a survey to get at the map for Zimbabwe if there's not one already out there, or at least for your organization. Now, but back to the assignment. Let me try to help you out with the assignment, okay? Within your tradition, is there a festival that you have that isn't anywhere else in the world? A celebration that you have, a cultural celebration.
Let me put it this way: we've been colonized since 1800, I think. So as a result, we have absorbed much of the Western way of living in a way. So issues like time, for example, unless you're living in the rural areas, but if you're in the urban areas, time is of essence. So we are almost like a mixed up culture in a way.
Okay. Since colonial days, did more than one power control you?
Yes, the British.
Besides,
we're very much colonized by the British in a big way.
Okay.
In a big way.
Yeah, and that tells me a lot. I do know something about the British, what's called the British school system. Okay. Which would explain tradition.
Okay.
Is there a food or an animal that is very symbolic of Zimbabwe?
Yes, we do have a traditional food. We do have that. Yeah, we do have that.
What is it?
It's made of corn. You grind it, and then it becomes porridge. It must become thick, and then with some relish, some bit of meat, and vegetables. You're home and dry.
Okay.
You're ready to go. Yeah.
I would use that for the assignment. Okay. Now, even if it's nothing more than you had to explain to somebody where it should be eaten, how it should be eaten, if there's certain observances you should do. Let me tell you kind of, another story. It is very rare in Italy for you to be invited into someone's home as a result of a business connection, okay?
Mhm.
And when I was a very young man, I think I was 24, maybe 27, I was sent to Italy to perform an audit of a major piece of General Electric company, and they wanted to buy a new computer rather than have a third shift operation. Okay. And while I'm there, you know, for whatever reason, the managing director got into his head that he wanted me and two other people to go to a dinner party at his house. Now, I think he was doing that to be sensitive to my culture, okay? Because that'd be something that would happen in the U.S. I mean, it'd be we deliberately have rooms in our home. Our homes in the U.S. are bigger than other parts of the world because we have a lot of land, and so we have this concept of having a room just dedicated, or at least we used to have a concept of a room just dedicated to entertaining guests called the parlor. Now, nowadays, it's become a family room and it's multi-purpose, but it used to be called the parlor, okay? So one of the natural things I asked was, well, okay, I want to bring something for the hostess. You know, what's traditional in your country? And the people looked at me like, huh? It seemed like a strange idea, right? Well, first of all, because it's strange to me, I didn't realize, you know, I was young, I didn't even realize how strange it was. So I went out to a local forest and I bought you can't see my hands, I bought a very large, beautiful potted plant. And I spent, this is going on my expense account, okay? Well, I think I spent like $50 US, and the year would have been maybe 1982, okay? And I bring this to this dinner party, and I completely shock the host's spouse. There's this massive thing that I mean as positive, right? There's no way they even have a place in their house to keep it. Yet obviously is it extremely expensive, right? What are they supposed to do? So I created a cultural dilemma there, just trying to be nice. Did that help, Mandavo?
Yes, thank you.
All right, I see that we have 1 minute left. Does anybody else need any guidance on this week's assignments? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Okay, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Okay, I think I got you muted if you want. Yeah, you are muted now. Yeah, I think it's a helpful, you know, concept as I think that we're looking at in terms of, especially as we're running organizations in various cultures. It's becoming aware of that culture. Let me turn on my video. I'm still having some computer issues. That it seems like it's very critical that we are aware of what's going on in our culture. And as Mandamo, you indicated, you know, it's for you're trying to become aware of some of those, what are some of those unique characteristics of your particular culture that you need to be aware of. You know, at BGU, we have what we call the 8 transformational perspectives. And, you know, one of those perspectives is called contextual leadership. And of course, the meaning there is that we become aware of the context in which we're leading. And I think that's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to become aware of the context of the particular culture, the environment where you and I are working in various organizations. So I think that that concept is critical to contextual leadership, just using, you know, the transformational perspectives that we talk about. We used to use a book, I don't know if we've used it in our courses lately, but it was called Orthodox Alaska by Michael Oleska. And it was written back in the 90s, but it's really about how Russian Orthodoxy came into Alaska and began to talk about Christianity. And, you know, those who have been involved in mission work, you know, that we're always looking for that particular context in which we can frame a message or something that we're talking about. In Alaska, the missionaries used the whale hunt as the contextual frame to begin to share the gospel, because there was the concept in the Alaskan culture that when they did a whale hunt, they would go after the whale, and because that whale would give his life actually for the community, and that some of the folklore even indicated that the whale actually somewhat gave himself for a community to eat and live. So of course, you know, that particular cultural issue was used by missionaries to frame the gospel message in language and with illustrations in a form that that particular Alaskan culture was able to understand. So when we're looking at organizations, we are always seeking to understand how we can frame our message in a way that it is understood and it's, you know, effectively communicated to a particular situation. So I think that's what we've been doing today, as we've been looking at some of these illustrations and trying to understand the mindset of particular people groups that we may be working with. So I really appreciate the experience that Dr. Leach has had internationally. He's, of course, have been in the business world quite a bit and learning how products can be contextualized, if we use our word. But again, it's the whole issue of learning to speak in a form, to communicate in a context that is relevant to the particular setting where we work. So I think as you're doing your final projects, that probably would be an interesting concept to be thinking about. Are there some particular cultural characteristics that you are aware of that might be discussed in your organization, because it's very germane to how you're communicating your message, your mission, your vision in the context of a particular locale. I think that's going to be it for today, unless anybody has any other last moment questions that you wanted to put forth before we close up the Zoom session.
Yes, Doc. I just need some clarity on the group project. If you could explain it again for me.
Okay, yeah. Where we're going to be going with this, you know, after you get through, you know, a few more books, and of course, you know, some of the different books you're reading are trying to give you either, like what we've done with the Trumpenauer book, you know, some context in terms of, you know, where you're functioning, or we're also giving you exposure to various leadership models. You've been looking at the Mitzberg model in the Deal and Bolman and Deal book. You know, next week we're going to be looking at the Joy at Work model. Dr. Brad Smith will be with us, and to explain a little bit how we use the Joy at Work leadership model at BGU. We'll also have, you know, in a few weeks we'll have Dr. Chuck Barber with us, who's he did his whole dissertation on using the Sigma 6 model for assessing an organization's, especially it was used in the manufacturing environment, but he took that model and he applied it to the transformational model that we talk a lot about, transforming people, organizations, cultures, communities. And so, you know, we'll look at the Sigma 6 model. Dr. Rogers another one of our faculty members will be with us in a few weeks, who will kind of talk about the adaptive leadership model and what that means. And I'm giving you a long answer here. You're going to finally get to a book. It's called Organizational Assessment in the Public Sector by Catherine Imordino. And that particular book will give you a lot of very specific categories for assessing an organization. You know, the employee culture, the employee emotional climate, leadership structure, the HR structure. You looked at a few of those within the frames model with Bowles and Deal. But the idea is, as you're looking at these various models, coming up with different ideas, and finally, when you get to the Imordino book on assessing the public sector, you're going to have, again, a lot of specific categories to use. And what we're going to want you to do is to take those kinds of categories and anything that you can learn from what we've been going over in terms of, culture, staff leadership cultures. Next week, we'll probably look at, for a long time, we've had a model of management called management by objectives, which, Peter Drucker and others kind of touted for, 30 years. We've moved more in many parts of the United States with more of a values structure. Joy at work is based on that. But the idea is we want you to look at your organization, try to understand its culture, any of these characteristics that maybe would be helpful to understand. And then you're going to design an assessment process for your organization. You would be, looking at if you're in an organization that has several employees, Imordino will talk about an employee culture. What's the climate? What's the emotional culture of that particular organization? Is it very lighthearted? Is it more formal? Is it, you get into leadership structure, is it more hierarchical? Is it more lateral? The decision-making is made, at various places rather than just at the top. You'll look at some of these various characteristics of your organization, and then you're going to design some questions that you could use with the people in your organization. Say you're in a big church, you may design, you would have to determine who's going to be a part of that assessment process. And you're going to maybe design some questions that could be asked, trying to understand how people feel and think about this particular organization. You're not going to be expected to implement that assessment process because you wouldn't have enough time. You're just going to design a process, come up with some categories that would be a part of that assessment, and design some questions that would help you get at some of the data that you would maybe need to understand to help your organization move forward. There may be some particular issues in your organization that need to be addressed at this moment in time. If you're not part of an organization at this time, you may have to think of an organization you've been a part of, or you may just have to put together a hypothetical organization. I'd rather that you use an organization you have either been a part of or that you're presently a part of, so that when you're thinking about the project assessment, you could put that, have it relevant to something. Okay, that's the final project. There really isn't a group project per se in this course, other than the fact that we're going to, the last session of this course, we're going to have a Zoom room just like we're doing now, but each of you will take 5 minutes to share an outline of the assessment process that you have designed by that point in the course. I, of course, am not expecting that you're going to have a totally complete assessment process at that point, but just to give an outline. And we'll talk about that a little more in a few more sessions. But for the group project, basically, I'm going to have you share that with the class and receive input from others in the class in terms of your particular outline. That'll be the extent of a group, any kind of a group project. A lot of the group work you're doing here, of course, is online. You're sharing thoughts. You're doing a lot of thinking together on issues. So that's kind of the group think tank that we're involved in here in our discussion. long answer, but I wanted to kind of get some of those ideas out, just, I think, just for reference purposes for all of us.
What's happening?
Hello. Can I have a quick word with Dr. Leach, please, before he goes? When I guess we're all through with our discussions today. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I've got to have a quick word with Dr. Leach too, so well, maybe you guys can talk for a few minutes and then I'll give you a call, Dr. Leach, for our conversation. Okay, with that, I think we are going to sign off. Again, we will be together again next week, same time on Tuesday. It's 9 a.m. in the morning my time. You'll have to translate to you